Not every prayer is spoken aloud. Some are born in silence. They grow in the soul and reach heaven, without anyone hearing. Sometimes what moves the impossible isn't a desperate cry for help, but the whisper of someone who still believes, even when everything seems lost. In an ordinary hospital, among cold hallways and machines that beeped like clocks with no time, there was a room where doctors no longer had answers. A woman, alone, intubated, forgotten even by her closest relatives, was fighting to keep going. No visits, no flowers, no promises of recovery. But on that particular night, something different happened. A heart monitor that usually remained stable flickered, and not for the worse. A slight rise in rhythm, an unexpected pattern. Nothing clinical, the doctor would say. Just coincidence, science might claim. But the night nurse had another thought. She believed someone was praying. And it wasn't the first time that it happened. In that wing, during certain late hours, a simple figure, almost invisible, would pass silently by the rooms. No uniform, no badge, just an ordinary woman, holding a small Bible, with eyes that carried more faith than explanations. No one knew who she was, but everyone knew what they felt after she passed. And that night, she stopped in front of room 408, where that hopeless patient lay, and she prayed, in silence, but deeply. And that's where this story begins to change. Before we continue, I want to invite you to do something. Write your name in the comments, or the name of someone you love and want to see healed. If you have a story like this, share it. Let's turn this comment section into an invisible altar, where every name is a cry for help, every comment a prayer, and every testimony a breath of hope. And if you feel this story can touch other lives, leave your like right now. Because this isn't just a video, it's an encounter. But something even more curious was about to happen, because what that woman held in her hands wasn't just a Bible. Inside it, something was hidden, something no one expected to find. But that would change everything. She never wore a lab coat, never signed any forms, never appeared in records, but all the staff knew that sometime between 3 and 5 a.m., that soft-footed woman would walk through the intensive care halls. Her name, few knew. But to the older nurses, she was just Grace, not a chaplain, not part of the team. She never charged for anything. She just showed up, always with the same serene expression, and asked one simple thing: "Can I pray for them?" At first, the hospital hesitated. It seemed odd, out of protocol. But Grace's gentleness disarmed any objection. She never interrupted procedures, never caused a stir. She'd stay at the door, often without entering, just observing. Sometimes, she'd extend her hand and whisper, "Lord, be a shelter for this soul." Sometimes she'd simply close her eyes for a few seconds, then move on, like someone planting a seed in the ground and leaving before it blooms. But that particular night, something made Grace stay longer than usual. As she passed room 408, she felt something different, as if the air had thickened, as if that patient's suffering was screaming without a sound. She approached the door and, as always, didn't force her way in. She just stood there. Right there. Her right hand on the doorframe, her Bible pressed to her chest. "I don't know her name, Lord, but you do." Silence. She's tired, alone. But your spirit hasn't left her. Touch her now where no medicine can reach. Send your relief where science has already given up. Show that life still exists, even when eyes can no longer see. Hope. Inside, the heart monitor blinked with a slightly different rhythm. The tech on duty didn't notice, but the nurse did. And in that moment, she didn't know why, but she felt like smiling. Grace opened the Bible, not to read, but to place something inside. A small piece of paper, carefully folded, with a handwritten phrase, "For those who've lost their strength but not their faith." She slipped the paper between 2 pages and closed it, then walked to the empty chapel in the hospital and left the Bible on the altar, like someone surrendering something that had already fulfilled its mission. And she left, unnoticed. No one saw her that night. But the effects of her silent prayer had already begun, because at the exact moment Grace left the hospital on the other side of the ICU glass, the patient in room 408 slightly moved her fingers. The motion was subtle, so small no one saw it. But inside her, something had shifted. The soul, which until then had seemed surrendered, began to respond. And it wasn't from medicine. It wasn't a clinical intervention. It was something else, something invisible, but real. The next day, her heart rate was more stable. Her blood pressure more controlled. The doctor was surprised, ordered new tests. The results were inconclusive, but positive, as if the body was fighting on its own, as if somehow it had received an injection of hope. And when the nurse asked, "Did something change?" the doctor simply replied, "I can't say, but if this continues, she might have a chance." And meanwhile, the Bible left in the chapel waited, open, silent, but holding within it a psalm not yet revealed, a psalm that later would find its purpose, and that purpose was waiting in room 408. Because even when no one sees, faith keeps planting invisible roots, and what is born from heaven doesn't need to be announced. It only needs to be believed. Her name was Linda, but no one at the hospital knew that. The records were incomplete. The emergency contact no longer answered. When she arrived at the ER, she carried only a medical bracelet from EMS, an expired ID, and a devastating diagnosis: acute respiratory failure, worsened by repeated infections and severe depression. She was 63 years old, according to the documents, but her soul felt much older, as if it had carried decades of pain alone. Linda was the mother of 3 children. One lived in another state. Another hadn't spoken to her in over 5 years. The third, well, no one really knew. Neighbors said she lived alone in a small house on the edge of town and spent much of her time just staring out the window, like someone waiting, or someone who had already stopped waiting. At the hospital, she was intubated after the first few days. Her condition worsened quickly, and with no family to be reached, she became known only as patient in 408. A woman with no visitors, no voices she recognized, no one calling her name. And yet, she wasn't completely alone. During the second week of her stay, something began to shift. Subtle changes, small signals. Linda started having brief moments of awareness. She mumbled incoherent words, moved her lips, and one morning, the nurse swore she heard something. Not quite a name, but more like a feeling, as if Linda was calling for someone, not by name, but by presence. That same morning, Linda woke for a few seconds. Her tired eyes locked onto the light seeping through the curtain. And then she whispered. She was here. The nurse, surprised, leaned in. "Who, Linda?" But she only repeated, the woman with calm eyes." The phrase was recorded in her chart as mild delirium. But for those with faith, not everything invisible is imagined. That night, Linda had a dream. She was sitting in a dark room. A door stood open at the far end, and from it came a soft glow. A woman appeared. She said nothing. She simply walked toward Linda, holding a Bible, touched her shoulder, and then disappeared. Linda woke up with tears in her eyes. The monitor showed a change in her vitals. Doctors were called, but she simply said, "I need the Bible." Not the kind of thing you expect from someone under sedation, but that's exactly what she said. With clarity, with intention, the medical team dismissed it, but the night nurse, moved by intuition, or something greater, quietly entered the hospital chapel. There, on the worn wooden table, still rested the Bible Grace had left behind. She picked it up, opened it without knowing why. Inside, a handmade bookmark, and the phrase, "For those who've lost their strength, but not their faith." Linda's name still wasn't in the official records, but God already knew every tear she had cried in silence. The nurse, touched by the gesture, brought the Bible to room 408, and placed it gently on the bedside table next to the IV. The next morning, Linda woke up. Her eyes were open, confused, but alive. And when she saw the Bible, she smiled. She came back, didn't she? The nurse didn't know how to respond. She just held her hand and said, maybe she never left. That morning marked the beginning of a turn. Small, almost invisible, but real. Linda, though still weak, began to respond emotionally. Her tears came more often, not of pain, but of release. She didn't yet know what was written in that book, but she could feel it, like someone rediscovering something long lost, because there are moments when heaven leans down so gently, the mind can't register, but the soul knows. And in that room, a seed had been planted, and it was beginning to bloom. And meanwhile, the bookmark with the handwritten phrase was still there, tucked between two unread pages. But those words were waiting for someone. And that someone already had a name and a destiny. The IT morning janitor always arrived early. He was methodical. He liked to sweep the chapel before the sun came up. That sacred little room tucked away at the end of the hallway was one of the few places in the hospital where silence ran deeper than pain. Some entered not knowing what to seek. Others simply sat and cried. And some, like Grace, left more than prayers there. They left seeds. That morning, something caught his attention. On the small wooden altar, an open Bible rested. But it wasn't simply forgotten. It had been placed as if someone wanted it to be found. Inside, between two well-worn pages, was a handmade bookmark. A piece of yellowed paper, its edges folded, with a phrase written in steady, almost childlike handwriting, for those who've lost their strength but not their faith. The janitor hesitated for a moment, then closed the Bible with reverence. And having already witnessed quiet miracles in that hospital, he decided to give it to someone who would know what to do. A few hours later, the afternoon nurse walked into room 408 with the Bible in hand. She didn't know that Linda had dreamed of that very object. She didn't know about Grace's prayer or the whispered words from days before. But when she saw the patient's eyes lock onto the book with sacred intensity, she understood. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a reunion. The Bible was placed gently on the bedside table. Linda didn't yet have the strength to open it, but its very presence seemed to shift the atmosphere in the room. The air felt lighter. The beeping machine seemed less oppressive. There was something else in that space now, as if the unseen had begun to take form. During the shift change, the nurse shared what had happened, and since no family member had yet shown up, she decided to leave the Bible there indefinitely. That night, when she entered the room again, she saw something unexpected. The patient was asleep, her hand resting on the book, as if protecting something precious. Linda, still fragile, began to speak soft words in her sleep. "Thank you. I'm here. I wasn't forgotten." The nurse was moved. And in that moment, she felt something she couldn't quite explain, but something that would stay with her for a long time. A presence. A quiet certainty. Something that cannot be taught, only experienced. The next day, her vitals were better. The doctors took note. And although there were no clear clinical explanations, the tests showed a slight but steady improvement. No one dared call it a miracle, but many thought it. Meanwhile, the bookmark was still there. No one had removed it. No one had read it aloud. But it waited. Because more than a piece of paper, it was an invitation. And the page it was placed on was the exact place where everything would make sense. But it wasn't time yet. Because what was hidden in those words needed to meet the right soul, the right moment, the right pain, and that moment was very near. Because some books change lives, but some pages change destinies. And inside that quiet, forgotten Bible, a psalm was about to rise, one no one expected, but that had always been there, waiting for someone like her. It was early morning again. The same half-open window let in the cold breath of the night. Linda, still weak, woke up alone. The room was dark, but she wasn't afraid. For the first time in many days, she didn't feel that heavy weight on her chest. Her hand moved slowly until it touched the Bible. It was still there, untouched, steady, as if it had been waiting for her. And then, without knowing why, she pulled the bookmark with trembling fingers. The handwritten words were still there, for those who've lost their strength but not their faith. She took a deep breath, opened the Bible exactly on that marked page, and read, with tired eyes, the first lines of what felt like more than just text. It was a mirror, a letter, an ancient cry that seemed written by someone who had lived her exact pain. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come to you. Do not hide your face from me in the day of my trouble. Psalm 102, 1-2. The words didn't just speak, they felt. Each verse seemed to translate Linda's soul, as if someone had written them while looking straight into her. The loneliness, the feeling of being forgotten, the battle against invisible pain. It was all there. She kept reading, and when she reached verse 17, something inside her broke into tears. He shall regard the prayer of the destitute, and shall not despise their prayer. Linda closed her eyes. A sob escaped, and with it, something deeper, the sense that, finally, she had been heard. That someone, even unseen, had reached her. In that moment, the door to the room opened softly. The night nurse, seeing Linda with the Bible in her arms, stood still. Linda looked into her eyes and said, "That was the psalm. That's what she wanted me to find." The nurse came closer, said nothing, just held her hand, and together, they prayed. Not with formulas, but with truth. If you're watching right now, I want to pray with you too. Maybe you're feeling like Linda, forgotten, tired, invisible, but today I want you to know you have been remembered. Pray with me now. Lord, in this day of trouble, do not hide your face from me. Hear my cry, even when I no longer know how to speak. I surrender to you my pain, my struggle, and my weariness. For you are the God who listens to the forgotten, the God who answers even when no one else does. Today I place my soul in your hands, and I declare even when everything seems lost, you are the God who restores what life tried to erase. Amen. If this prayer spoke to you, do something simple but powerful. Write the name of someone you carry in your heart here in the comments. It could be your own name, or someone you love. Share your story, your testimony, or your request. Let's turn this space into a temple of faith. Every name will be seen. Every name will be remembered. And if this message touched your soul, leave a like right now, not for the algorithm, but as an act of faith, like a seed, waiting to bloom. And in room 408, the seed had taken root. But what would happen in the following days would still surprise even those who believed. Room 408 rested in silence. Linda, after reading Psalm 102, had fallen asleep with the Bible in her arms, like someone holding a revealed secret. The night nurse, seeing that scene, didn't have the heart to turn off the bedside lamp. She simply walked over and, before leaving, left something of her own. A small note with just one phrase, "You were seen." That nurse's name was Evelyn. She had worked in that ICU for 8 years. She had seen it all. Silent goodbyes, unexplained miracles, pain that seemed endless. But that night, something in her broke, or maybe opened. She wasn't sure. She only knew she had to do something more. She finished her shift with tears in her eyes. And when she got home, instead of sleeping, she went to her bookshelf, took down a notebook she had used for years, a place where she wrote the names of people she prayed for in silence. There were names of patients, family members, even strangers she had crossed paths with. But never, in all those years, had she written the name of someone she didn't know. Until that night. With trembling hands, she wrote, "Linda, the woman God visited in silence." Below the name, she drew a small heart and wrote a verse her grandmother used to repeat. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Psalm 27:10. Evelyn closed the notebook gently and prayed. Not with many words, but with the kind of plea only someone who works between life and death knows how to make. God, continue what you've begun, and if she forgets, remind her. That very night, something different began happening in other rooms. A patient with terminal cancer, room 412, showed slight unexpected improvement. A man waiting for a transplant, room 405, had a moment of lucidity after days of confusion. No one connected it to Linda, but Evelyn did. She began whispering the same line from Psalm 102 in every room she entered, as she changed IV bags, fluffed pillows, adjusted blankets. The Lord hears the prayer of the destitute and does not despise their cry. It became a kind of spiritual seed, a quiet faith sown in the atmosphere, unnoticed by most. And even if it seemed foolish to some, Evelyn began to see something shift. Not in the charts, but in the eyes, in the patients, in the family members, in her own co-workers. She started bringing the Bible to work, tucked discreetly in her bag. She didn't make a show of it, didn't preach, didn't impose. But now and then she'd leave it open on the break room counter. Open, silent, like a candle lit in the dark. And there, among meds, charts, and invisible prayers, Evelyn realized something that would forever change how she cared. Medicine treats the body, but sometimes the soul just needs a reminder that it's still alive. On one of her next shifts, she returned to Linda's room, now more awake, still weak, but conscious. Linda smiled when she saw her. Evelyn took her hand and said, "I don't know if you remember me, but I was here." On the night of the psalm, Linda squeezed her hand lightly. "I remember the sound of your prayer, even if you didn't say it out loud." The two of them became emotional, and at the end of her shift, Evelyn returned to her notebook. Below the name, "Linda," she wrote. She heard what the world couldn't hear. She felt what medicine couldn't see. She survived what looked like the end. And in that hospital, a new invisible chain had begun, a network of silent faith. No signs, no services, no videos, just names, written with tears and hope, names that rose to heaven like living prayers. And Linda was the first link, in a chain that would never break. And in room 408, the seed had bloomed. But what would happen in the days that followed would still surprise even the faithful. In the days after the psalm was revealed, something changed in room 408. The machines were still there. The beeping monitors still marked time with their usual coldness. But there was something else in the air, something no one could measure, but everyone could feel. Linda began eating again. First through a tube, then slowly, with small spoonfuls of broth. Her voice was still weak, but her words were clear, and one word she kept repeating was gratitude. She couldn't explain how she had gotten better. She didn't even know exactly when things began to change. She only knew that after that prayer, after that psalm, a new strength had risen within her. It wasn't physical. It came from the soul. And that strength was healing the rest. The doctors cautiously ordered new tests. The scans showed a significant reduction in inflammation. Risk indicators began to drop. One of the specialists reviewing the charts whispered, "It wasn't supposed to be like this." The nurse smiled. "Maybe that's exactly why it is." But while Linda was blooming, Grace vanished. The woman who had come every night was no longer seen in the hospital halls. No entries were logged. No prayers were heard. Some staff wondered if she had stopped coming. Others believed she was praying somewhere else, for another forgotten soul. Linda asked about her often. "The woman with the Bible, has anyone seen her?" The answer was always the same. "No, Miss Linda, but somehow it feels like she's still here." And maybe she was. The following week, Linda was discharged from the ICU. Room 408, for the first time in a long while, stood empty, but not silent. because those who passed by felt something different, as if the walls still echoed, a prayer no one had heard. But that had changed everything. As she prepared to leave the hospital, Linda asked to take the Bible with her. The staff agreed. They said the book had already fulfilled its role there. But when she opened it, she found something that hadn't been there before, a new bookmark tucked into the end of Psalm 102. On it, a single phrase: "If you made it this far, it's because God never left your side." Linda embraced the book like someone returning home. And in that embrace, she carried more than just pages in scripture. She carried a story, an answer, a silent miracle. Days later, she would write her testimony on the hospital's message board. The words were simple but said everything. I wasn't healed by treatment alone. I was remembered, touched, visited by a woman who never told me her name, but introduced me to the God who never forgot me. And while many kept searching for explanations, Linda had already found what she was looking for. Because sometimes, what heals isn't what you see. It's what you feel. It's what you believe. It's what remains, even when everything else seems gone. Maybe you'll never know who is praying for you at this very moment. Maybe you'll never see the face of the one kneeling in the silence of night, pleading for your life, your healing, your soul. But that doesn't mean you are alone. Because there is a kind of love that needs no stage, a kind of faith that needs no spotlight, and a kind of prayer that moves heaven, even when no one sees. If you're carrying invisible pain today, or know someone who seems forgotten in the middle of their battle, know this: there is a God who hears you before you even speak. And there are people like Grace who walk among us, silent but led. People who pray for those who can no longer pray for themselves. People who plant seeds of life where others see only the end. Now, I invite you to be part of this chain. Write your name in the comments, or the name of someone you love. Share your story, your prayer, your testimony. Let's turn this page into a living altar of faith where every written word becomes an unspoken prayer, filled with power. And if this message touched your soul, leave your like right now, as an act of trust, like a light lit in the middle of the dark. Because sometimes the prayer that saves isn't the one we say for ourselves, but the one someone whispered out of love.